The Texas Longhorns will be facing 9 Core 4 opponents this season in their first year in the SEC, and Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus is here to tell you a little bit about each one.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. Also, today's episode brought to you by Pro Football Focus. Max Chadwick joining the show once again today. And Max, last time we talked was after the NFL draft. Right. And you were talking about how you finally were getting some resemblance of an offseason. Right. But then you had to pick it back up. It goes from the NFL draft to covering the next college football season. So what have the last 2 months ish since the NFL draft looked like for you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, man. It's been a lot of previewing, right? We're doing actually at pff.com, if you want to check it out, we're previewing every single Power 4 team. Also the two left behind Pac-12 schools. We're also going to give them a preview as well in Oregon State and Washington State. And we're also going to obviously Notre Dame as well. And then 10 group of 5 teams too. So in total, 80 teams will be getting full previews over at pff.com. Most of the SEC is out. I think only 2 teams, Mississippi State and Vanderbilt, are not out yet. Texas obviously is out already. So full previews. And we're doing a bunch of stuff on the PFF College Football Show as well, including previewing every team like that and also ranking every position as well. So it is the offseason technically, but there really is no offseason right now. It actually feels like I'm more busy now than I was even during the season, honestly. So it's still a very exciting time as we ramp up with about, 2 months to go until college football starts again. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, patiently waiting for August 31st, even though I know the season starts officially before that. That's when our season starts, the season I care about. I have to ask you, though, right? Because, and you probably didn't even notice you said this, but we've rebranded from the Power 5 to the Core 4. But you said Power 4. Are you not on board with Core 4 or what's going on there?
I like the Core 4. I heard you say it a couple times. I don't think I've ever heard that before. I kind of like the Core 4. It kind of rolls off the tongue better. I've just been saying Power 4 just because I thought it's just easier to remember it that way because I'm so used to saying Power 5. I don't like Core 4, though. I think if we want to change to that, I'm sure the Big 12 is going to change their name pretty soon, it sounds like. If we change the Power 4 to the Core 4, I kind of like that, though. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I saw it on Twitter somewhere, or I think in an article. Maybe like it was like an On3 article, and I just loved it. So I was like, okay, I guess this is what we're rocking with. So
I like it
yeah,
too,
if I can spread the gospel, if I can push Core 4 as much as I can, I will. Like I said, I got Max Chadwick on from Pro Football Focus. We're getting closer, about 2 months away from the college football season for the Texas Longhorns, and a lot of change in college football, coaching changes, transfer changes, schools moving conferences, right? We're seeing a lot of change that we just really are not used to in college football, at least this much at one time, right? And so you look at it, Texas is facing 9 Core 4 opponents this year, a lot of them new, that they haven't faced in a while or haven't faced regularly. And so Max Chadwick is here to, give us somewhat of the scouting report on these teams. Let's start with Michigan. Defending national champions, and they lost a lot, right? But Texas will be heading to the Big House week 2 of the regular season. Going to be one of the best games of the college football season. I think that'll be the first real test for Sharon Moore and this Michigan team without a Jim Harbaugh, without a Blake Corum, without a J.J. McCarthy, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm asking you, the expert in college football, what are your expectations for the first year of the Sharon Moore era at Michigan?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting because I think they still have one of the best, if not the best, defense in the country. I know they lost some talent on that side of the ball, but their defensive line, and they lost Jesse Minter too, their defensive coordinator, who's I thought was brilliant. Now he's the Chargers defensive coordinator with Jim Harbaugh. But even with all those losses, even with 5 guys getting drafted on their defense, they still have an unreal defense returning next year. I mean, you have maybe the best defensive line in college football. I put Ohio State number 1, but you can make a strong argument that Michigan is number 1, and they were number 2 in my ranking. I had them with the 7th best linebacker unit in the country, and I had them with the 4th best secondary in the country as well. So they are loaded at all 3 levels of that defense. In fact, I think their D-line has the best D-tackle in the country in Mason Graham. They have the best corner in the country in Will Johnson. And they have like a top 5 linebacker in the country in Jay Sean Barham. So every level has a superstar there. The question is offensively. They lost so much offensively, right? They lost a starting quarterback in JJ McCarthy, won first round. They lost maybe their greatest running back of all time, or up there with Blake Corum. They lost their top 6 offensive linemen, are all gone as well, and their top 2 wide receivers. Now, they still have the best tight end in the country in Colston Loveland, and a really good running back in Donovan Edwards. But Sharon Moore, who was the offensive coordinator last year, has his work cut out for him, right? There is a lot to replace on that side of the ball. So Michigan's defense is still national championship caliber. The question is, will the offense live up to that? And I think that's going to be a big test for them going into that Texas game.
Yeah, somewhat of a quick hitter. Who do you expect their starting quarterback to be, and how do you view him in relation to J.J. McCarthy? Maybe not the finished product of J.J. McCarthy, but what we initially saw from him.
I think it's going to be Alex Orji, who was used a lot as like a Wildcat quarterback for them last year. And if you ask me what I think of him as a passer, I can't really tell you. He has literally 2 dropbacks in his career. Like, we have not seen this guy throw the ball much at all. In fact, if you really want to see the guy throw the ball, the best thing you can do is watch a spring game, right? That's all you really have on him. There's not a lot of game tape of him throwing the ball. He is a powerful runner. He's 6'3", 236. So he will be a really good element in the run game for them. And he's got a really strong arm. I just think his ball placement's spotty right now. It's a lot of unknown of him as a passer right now. I still think it's an open competition. I still think there are other guys that are, fighting for that spot, but I would say Alex Orji. He was the starter in the spring game, and I think he's pretty clearly the favorite to be the starting quarterback. And then we have no idea what he is as a passer because we just haven't seen him do it yet, really.
Yeah, I think that sound you just heard is Texas fans rushing to their betting apps to smash the spread, smash the Texas covering the spread for sure. Because if Texas is going to face off in week 2 against a quarterback who you're not confident in throwing, we did that last year and we came out on top. Now looking at Mississippi State, new era, right? New quarterback in Blake Shapen, new head coach in Jeff Lebby. What are your expectations in year 1 for them? Can you see a team led by Blake Shapen and Jeff Lebby winning games in the SEC at a high level?
Yeah, I think Mississippi State is certainly one of the worst teams in the SEC heading into next year. They have a new head coach, you mentioned, in Jeff Lebby, who did an excellent job at Oklahoma as their offensive coordinator. And it's good to see Mississippi State get back to that side of the ball and get back to being an offensive-minded team. Under Zach Arnett, who was a defensive coordinator under the late Mike Leach, when he passed away, they got promoted to head coach. Kind of got rid of the air raid offense that made Mississippi State so famous, made Mike Leach so famous, and it did not work out at all. Mississippi State's defense was actually pretty solid, but the offense was terrible. Now I think you'll see the offense kind of get revitalized under Jeff Lebby, and I think we have 8 transfers that are probably going to start on that side of the ball. I really like Jeff Lebby as their head coach and as offensive-minded head coach. The question is defensively, they lost 8 starters from a defense that was about average last year. And they really were not good in terms of getting after the quarterback. In fact, they had the 10th worst pass rushing grade in the country last year. So you have a lot of new starters on defense. I think they have questions everywhere on defense. And then a lot of new starters on offense too. But I feel a little bit better about the offense because they brought in some talented transfer players, and also Jeff Lebby is coaching up that offense now. But I think Mississippi State is still probably going to be some adjustment for them as they move into the Jeff Lebby era. So I do think they'll still be one of, if not the worst SEC team, or actually probably the second worst SEC team heading into next year.
The good thing is the unequivocally worst SEC team is also on Texas schedule this year in Vanderbilt, who we'll talk about later. But you mentioned it, losing 8 starters on the defense. That wasn't great to begin with last year. First SEC game officially for the Texas Longhorns at home in DKR. Sounds like a Heisman moment for Quinn Ewers. I want to talk about Oklahoma, in the Red River. This is a game that's carrying over, obviously, a lot of history there. And Oklahoma fans have been on a rampage, right, this summer. They feel as though they are being slighted. They feel as though everybody is asleep on them. They think that they are going to come in right away and tear up the SEC, and they're the only ones that see it, right? So when you look at their schedule and when you look at their roster, do you see Oklahoma as more of an 8-4-ish win team, or more of a 10-2, 11-1-ish win team this season, and why? I know you're shaking your head because you're smart and you understand football. So, but yeah, please go ahead and explain it.
I'm shaking my head because I want to get brownie points with you and your listeners right now by saying that. No, I think Oklahoma is more like an 8-4 team this year. Obviously, going to a tougher conference in the SEC. I think Texas is more well-equipped to handle that transition than Oklahoma is right now. The best way I think to describe Oklahoma is a whole new era for them, right? They have first of all, they're in the SEC now. Second of all, they have a new starting quarterback after Dylan Gabriel transferred to Oregon. Jackson Arnold, who was a 5-star recruit a couple of years ago, really high on him, but obviously it's his first time being a starter, so we'll see how he does. A new offensive coordinator, because we mentioned before how Jeff Lebby left their program, and their offensive line is brand new. Like, they have starters, brand new 5 starters all across the offensive line. Now, their receiving core is really good still a top 10 receiving core in the country. They have a loaded defense at linebacker and in the secondary as well. So I think that'll help them. But I do think there's a lot of questions on that offense, specifically the offensive line. I have a lot of questions with. I like Branson Hickman, the transfer center they got from SMU. But other than that, the other 4 spots have serious question marks on that offensive line. So I do think Jackson Arnold has a high ceiling. And I do think the defense has some really good players, and I like the receiving core a lot. But I think there's a lot of new moving parts in that roster. And since they're moving from the Big 12 to the SEC, getting a harder schedule as well, it's going to take some time, I think. If they gel quickly, if they gel immediately, yeah, they can compete for a playoff spot. But I think it'll take some time for Oklahoma to really find its footing next year.
Quick hitter, what are your thoughts on the timing of the Brent Venables extension?
Yeah, it's a little interesting, right? I think I don't hate it. I thought he did a good job last year. Obviously, turning around that first year at Oklahoma was rough. I think, actually, I wrote it down. It was Oklahoma's first losing season in the 21st century in 2022. So it was a rocky start to the Brent Venables era at Oklahoma. But I do think he's a solid coach, and obviously he turned it around last year with a 10-3 record. Again, I think they'll kind of take a little bit of a step back this year, kind of be in the middle of 2022 and 2023 with about, like you said, like an 8-4. I think it's around where I would expect Oklahoma to be this year. So yeah, it was an interesting timing for the extension. I would have probably waited a little bit more to see what we can get out of him in the SEC, but I don't hate it at all. I think he's a solid coach, and I think it's worth keeping him around for a little bit.
Certainly agree with everything you just said. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into Georgia, arguably the biggest game in college football this season. What does Max Chadwick have to say about the Bulldogs? Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns. Excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. There we go. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, but not just the first pitch. NBA, NFL, college sports, the WNBA. You can buy anything on Gametime for very competitive pricing. You have priority last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. I told y'all I went to a Las Vegas Aces game in Vegas on a Friday night for $34. I bought the ticket that week on Gametime. Flash deals, save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Zone deals, save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats. All-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout and more. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB and other sport tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, Max. So we're talking about the Georgia Bulldogs, and they had a little bit of a down year last year. Lost in the SEC championship and then smoked Florida State by 60. Right. So I guess that's a down year for the Georgia Bulldogs at this point. How would you compare this roster in 2024 to the last 3 who were all champion/championship favorites? Obviously, you don't have to compare each one individually, but do you think this roster is on par with the last 3 we've seen at the University of Georgia?
Yeah, I still think this is one of the best teams in the country. And you can make a strong argument that they are number one. It's funny to say they had a down year last year. They went 13-1, and it's like, yeah, it is still a down year because it's the only year of the last 3 years where they didn't win the national championship, right? So it's kind of interesting where that's like a dream season for basically any other program, and Georgia is like, oh yeah, we had a rough year last year. It's like, man, it's a good problem to have if that's your rough year. But yeah, Georgia, I think, still has one of the best rosters in the country. In fact, they were one of 2 schools to be in the top 10 of every single one of my position unit rankings, which means quarterback room, running back unit, receiving core, offensive line, defensive line, linebacker unit, secondary. Georgia was in the top 10 for all of them. Ohio State was the only one that was in the top 10. They have the best quarterback in the country, in my opinion, Carson Beck. Like I said, they're loaded everywhere on that roster. I think their pass rush can be a little bit improved. I do think that was one area that they were okay at last year, and they kind of have the same players as last year, so I want to see that improve. But I think Georgia's so talented, and I think they're easily a top 2 or 3 team in college football right now.
You said you believe this is the second time you've said this on this podcast, so you're disrespecting Quinn Ewers a little bit. I'm just playing, but this is now the second time you've said that Carson Beck is your number one guy going into the season at the quarterback position. Somewhat of a quick hitter, but what's his superpower? What's his one trait that you believe has him above everybody else right now?
Yeah, I think it's his accuracy and his timing. I just think he's got a good arm. He's a great pocket passer. I think it's just he's so precise in every area, right? There's some guys like Jalen Moreau, for example, who hold onto that ball for forever. He does not do that. He gets rid of the ball quickly. He gets rid of the ball accurately. And he gets rid of the football to a guy that is open, right? And I think it's not a sexy style play. It's not like a Caleb Williams who's going to make magical plays out there, but he just runs that offense efficiently with precise timing and precise accuracy. So I think that is his superpower right now. Don't get me wrong. He's the best quarterback in the country. This is one of the weaker, number one quarterbacks that we've had in recent years. There's not a true, mega star, superstar like we've had in Bryce Young or Caleb Williams or guys like that. But I do think Carson Beck is the best in the nation right now. Because like I said, his accuracy and timing are just unbelievable.
If Texas beats Georgia, is it a bigger win than beating Alabama last year?
Ooh, I think it is. I would say so. I think Alabama had some warts that everyone kind of knew going into that game, and Texas did expose them in that game. Georgia doesn't really have that. Georgia's kind of thought of as the number one team, and I bet they will be number one in the ranking by the time they play each other. I think they're going to open the season at number one in the preseason poll. So, if you beat the number one team in the country, it's probably going to be a bigger one for Texas. But that's a good question, though. I think it's certainly comparable, at least.
Yeah, I think the only reason you can maybe edge Alabama because it was on the road, and that was like the first signature win of the Sark era. So if you beat Georgia, you'd be less surprised because of the Alabama win last year. But like you said, it's the number one team, 2 of the last 3 championships. Probably the only team that's going to be favored over Texas on their schedule this year. Definitely would be a bigger win against Georgia than against Alabama, in my opinion. Moving on to Arkansas, this one should be pretty short and sweet. But do you feel as though there is anything Sam Pittman can do within reason, right, to keep his job this season?
Man, it's tough. I think Arkansas is another school that just, they had a rough year last year, obviously going 4-8. They actually had a good 2 years before that. They were 16-10 across 2021 and 2022. But I think their defensive line is pretty solid. They have some guys like Landon Jackson who are, getting first round mocks sometimes, but their passing game is very underwhelming right now. Talon Green is the new quarterback from Boise State. He was 120th in passing grade last year in the country. They bring back their top 8 pass catchers, but only one of them had more than 400 yards last year in Andrew Armstrong. So, and also their offensive line was 99th in pass blocking grade last year. So the passing game is going to be a big, big question mark. I think Arkansas has talent at all 3 levels of its defense, but they have some serious offensive concerns next year that make me a little queasy when you start talking about, are they going to bounce back from last year? I think the offensive concerns kind of hold me back and think they might be another team that might go, I think around 6-6 is what they're expecting and hoping for. But I could see them missing a bowl game once again. And
so if they miss that bowl game, you think Sam Pittman's out of there?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's one of the guys who's on one of the hottest seats in college football right now. There are actually a couple guys in the SEC that are on scorching hot seats right now. And I think Sam Pittman certainly fits that bill.
All right. Hopefully you keep up with college baseball. So hopefully this joke lands. But the next one is Texas A&M. Is there any chance that we're still in their coach after the season?
Mike Elko's the new defensive coordinator for Sarkisian out there. Yeah.
Right. Obviously, we're not replacing Sark, but man, I just had to throw that in there. It's still fresh. When you talk about Texas A&M, obviously this game has been anticipated for over a decade. Regardless of record, what would a win for Texas mean in this game, and what would a win for A&M mean in this game?
I think it's great. A lot of people hate all the moves in college football because they hate the rivalries dying. We're also getting some rivalries, that are getting revitalized right now, and Texas and Texas A&M is one of them. Excuse me, but I think Texas, a win for them would not mean too much in the grand scheme of things, but it would be nice to get a win over an old rival. A&M would be huge if they could beat Texas in this game. A&M's got a great defense. I think they're Connor Wegman, their quarterback, is actually the number one quarterback in the draft, according to our lead draft analyst, Trevor Sycamore. I don't necessarily agree with that right now because he certainly does have a super high ceiling. But I think A&M, that would be a massive win for Mike Elko and that program. And I think, Elko, something he's done a really good job of at Duke that Jimbo did not do a good job of at A&M was that he developed talent really well. Like, he did not recruit all that great at Duke because it really is hard to recruit at Duke. But the players he got, he coached them up and they played a lot better than what they were coming out of high school. Jimbo was the opposite. He brought in, 8 5-stars in one class, the greatest recruiting class we've ever seen a few years ago at A&M. And they just didn't coach them up enough. And so I think Mike Elko's done a great job of having guys punch above their weight class. And now you give them a really, really talented roster. I'm excited to see what A&M could do next year. I think they have concerns on their offensive line and the receiving core, but I think the Aggies could make some serious noise next year because I like Connor Wegman. I like their defense, and I love Mike Elko. I think he's a really good coach.
For sure. I've seen a lot of people that are, pretty high. I wouldn't say high on A&M, but think they could be 8-4 and 9-3. And obviously respect your opinion. You basically just said the same thing. Like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I don't think you would be surprised if they went 8-4 or 9-3 this year for sure. So, yeah, shout out to them. Well, hopefully we beat the hell out of them and take their coach after still. Quick word from our sponsors, and then 3 more opponents to talk about in the SEC for Texas this season. All right, so the next team I want to ask you about is a team that, was in the conversation every year when I was growing up, and, they've fallen from grace recently, the Florida Gators. The first thing I want to ask you about, Texas kid, DJ Lagway, is there any chance that he ends up as their starter this season? Maybe not day one, but just at some point this season, is there any chance DJ Lagway is their starter?
Oh, I don't think so. I actually do like Graham Mertz a good bit. He's kind of like the college Kirk Cousins in a lot of ways, where it's like he's not a superstar, but he's like good enough, right? He had a career year last year, so I think they're okay at quarterback. Mertz actually, speaking of Trevor Sikkema in his rankings, he actually had Mertz as a top 5 quarterback in the draft too. So Lagway's super talented. He's actually maybe the most important recruit of any recruit that's coming in this year, because I think just they need Lagway to be a superstar, right? That program desperately needs, and they need Lagway to stick around, right? If Billy Napier, if this goes south, which it can very easily, and Billy Napier gets fired, like, you got to hope that DJ Lagway doesn't enter the transfer portal like that. So I like Florida's offense a lot. I actually think they have some really good offensive pieces. They have a really good offensive line. I like Mertz. I like some of their guys in the receiving core as well. I like Montrell Johnson, their running back. So I think their offense is actually pretty good. But I think their defense really is where it's going to struggle. And that could be a big issue against Texas in that game. They were 111th in coverage grade last year and 62nd in pass rushing grade. So I think Quinn Ewers is going to have a big, big day against Florida. And also, Florida lost their star edge defender in Princely Amon-Mielen and 2 of its top 3 corners to the transfer portal. So you already talked about how bad the pass defense was last year, and then you lost like 3 of your best players from that pass defense. So that could be a huge, huge game for Quinn Ewers, Isaiah Bond, and the rest of that Texas offense in that game. But I do think Florida's offense has a lot of talent everywhere. It's just a matter of, can the defense kind of match it for them to make a bowl game next year and save Billy Napier's job?
Yeah. So a few things. You mentioned Prince. I'm not going to say his last name, but Austin area kid. In terms of, you said the game against Florida could be the Heisman moment for Quinn Ewers, for sure. Another Heisman moment, a big day for him. But let's not stop it there, right? Let's have it be a big day for Arch Manning too, right? Let's get him in there, right, in the fourth quarter. Let's beat Florida so bad that Arch Manning gets some quality tape out there as well against the Florida Gators for sure. Florida must have a record of blank for Billy Napier to keep his job this year, in your opinion.
So it's funny that you say that, because it would be pretty awesome to see the number 1 quarterback in 2023, Arch Manning, and maybe Florida throws in the number 1 quarterback from 2024 and DJ Lagway. We see those kids go at it for a little bit. That could be fun. I think 6-6 would get it done. I think if you go 6-6, people need to I think everyone does understand that schedule is ridiculous for the Gators next year. Like, they legit have one of the hardest schedules I've ever seen. Their last 5 games are against like ridiculously talented teams like Florida State, Texas, LSU,
Ole Miss, Texas, Florida State, Georgia, and then LSU, right, or something like that.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like there's 5 top 20 teams in the country, right? And then they play some other really good teams before in the earlier in the season too. They played Miami at game 1, which I think Miami's winning the ACC this year. So I think Florida, I think people understand, like, hey, with this schedule, if they go 6-6. That's a miracle, right? And I think that should be enough for him to keep his job. But if he goes 5-7, even though 5-7 with that schedule is not that bad, I think he might be on his way out. So I think it's almost bowl game or bust for Billy Napier this year.
Okay. Kentucky who Texas will be facing off this season. Could have been facing off against the coach Mark Stoops.
Yeah, Mark Stoops.
Yeah, he was almost the coach at A&M, so it looked like we were going to face off against Mark Stoops anyway this year, but he's back at Kentucky. 10-3 in 2021, falling from grace a little bit since then, 2 back-to-back 7-6 seasons. Is there any chance in 2024 that Kentucky may return to that 2021 form and sneak up on everybody and win 10 games in this version of the SEC?
I think 10's a little much. I think their win total right now for FanDuel is 6.5, and we predict them around 7 wins this year. So I think 7-5 is probably where I expect them. But you mentioned it; their defense is going to be legit, man. They have a really good defense next year. I think they have. So I rank the top 10 position units, like I said before. They have my number 3 linebacker unit in the country. Their linebackers are loaded next year. They got a big transfer in Jamin Dubas-Johnson from Georgia. They also have Deon Walker, who in my opinion is the second best D tackle in the country. So on the defensive line, and their secondary is really good too. So I think their defense is actually really good. And I'm excited to see how Quinn Ewers and that Texas offense handles Kentucky's defense. The question is, they have a really good receiving core, but outside of that, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. Their starting quarterback will be another Georgia transfer in Brock Vandagriff. Now, he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, but that was 3 years ago, and we have no idea what he looks like as a starter. He's been on the bench for 3 years at Georgia. Now he's entering year 4, finally getting a chance to be a starting quarterback. So he has a high ceiling for sure. That's why he's a 5-star recruit, but we just have no idea what he looks like as a starter. Chip Trayanum is a new running back coming in from Ohio State. He hasn't really started in his career either after playing 4 seasons at Ohio State too. They do have 4 returning starters on the offensive line, but they were 97th in offensive line grade last year too. So there's a lot of uncertainty on that offense. They have a high ceiling with Brock Vandagriff and Chip Trayanum, and that receiving core is really good too. Like I said, that defense is loaded, but it's just whether or not Vandagriff can live up to that 5-star hype for me to really be all in on Kentucky next year. If he does live up to the hype, yeah, Kentucky can surprise a lot of people, including Texas next year. But if he doesn't, that's where it gets a little hazy for me with Kentucky.
For sure. Last team I want to talk about is Vanderbilt, and Texas has the luxury of traveling to Nashville this year to face off against the Commodores. Honestly, I love Nashville. It's one of my favorite cities. I think the city of Nashville may be a bigger threat to victory for the Longhorns than the actual Vanderbilt Commodores. You know what I mean? Because it's just too easy to have a blast in Nashville, man. So I'm asking you, Ryan, this is kind of a funny question because obviously, you take a win any way you can get it. But what margin of victory would be acceptable against the Commodores for this version of the Texas team? I mean, I would say they have to beat them by at least 28, right? I need Arch Manning to play the whole fourth quarter.
Yeah.
So, what margin of victory would be acceptable? And we wouldn't be like, how did that happen against the Vanderbilt Commodores this year?
Yeah, I think Vanderbilt's I was literally just going to make that joke too. I was like, man, the only chance Vanderbilt really has in this game is just to get Texas as drunk as possible on Friday night, the night before that game, and Nashville, have a good time in Nashville, and then hopefully they show up hungover and don't play as well. But listen, I'm not trying to hang on the Commodores too much. It's been a rough stretch for Vanderbilt. I mean, 2022 they actually showed some encouraging signs, right? They went 5-7, which for Vanderbilt's a really, really good year. This past year though, they fell back to 2-10, and they were one of the worst teams in the country, actually the worst record in the Power 5 that we had this last year. So, yeah, I think at least 30 points should be expected for Texas to win this game. They do have a really good rushing quarterback coming in Diego Pavia. They have some good players at linebacker and safety as well. But other than that, man, they have a brutal schedule. They play a really hard schedule, and they have so many glaring holes on this roster. They had the 6th worst offense last year, the 2nd worst defense in the Power 5. So it's a lot of holes in this Vanderbilt roster right now. And yeah, they're certainly one of the worst. They're the worst team in the SEC for sure. And they are certainly one of the worst teams in the Power 4 that we have right now, or Core 4, whatever you want to say.
Thank you. There we go. Core 4. Embrace it. It's going to take time. No, yeah. I mean, I just want to say that I will forever beat the biased allegations because I said 28 and Max Chadwick said 30. Right? Now he does have the Texas helmet in the back, as you can see. But even I gave Vanderbilt a little bit more grace than Max Chadwick did. Of course, Pro Football Focus always kills it when they come on the show. They kill it with everything they do. And then Max Chadwick for the second time coming on the podcast. Max Chadwick CFB on Twitter, and you can find him on Pro Football Focus. It's college football show. And of course, he'll be back on Locked On Longhorns again soon. Next time, there'll be an official member of the SEC. Hook 'em. Peace.